Cryptographers spent more than 100 years unable to decipher even a single page. Even the former code-breaking team of Alan Turing walked away with nothing. Then a small university computer lab, not a group of historians, aimed an AI language model at the book. What it found, nobody had anticipated. The book that defeated every codebreaker. The Voynich Manuscript is an actual book housed in Yale University's Baenica Rare Book and Manuscript Library, catalogued as MS-408. It spans roughly 240 pages of animal skin parchment known as vellum, covered in flowing handwritten text in a script no living person can decipher. Scientists at the University of Arizona ran radiocarbon dating on 4 separate parchment samples back in 2009 and landed on a result carrying 95% certainty. The vellum itself had been produced somewhere between 1404 and 1438, planting the book squarely in the early 1400s, during Europe's late Middle Ages. The pages are also crammed with peculiar illustrations. There are plants resembling no known species on Earth, star charts, and zodiac imagery. Naked women soaking in pools linked by strange tubes, circular diagrams that some researchers call rosettes, vessels that appear medicinal, and dense passages of text that certain scholars believe may be recipes. Historians divided all of this content into 6 separate sections based entirely on the images, given that the attached words remain unreadable to anyone. These are the settled facts that nearly every historian who has examined the manuscript agrees upon. The real controversy erupts the instant someone attempts to explain what those words actually say. And that controversy drew artificial intelligence into the picture a few years ago, through the efforts of computer scientists willing to try a different approach. In January of 2018, a natural language processing specialist named Greg Condra, together with his graduate student Bradley Hauer at the University of Alberta, decided to direct an AI system at the manuscript. Rather than attempting to translate the words outright, they constructed an algorithm designed to identify the language of origin first. Their approach drew on samples of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights rendered across 400 different languages, then measured patterns from those texts against patterns detected in the Voynich script. Their initial assumption was that the manuscript might be rooted in Arabic. Once the algorithm completed its analysis, the outcome pointed somewhere entirely different. Hebrew emerged as the most probable candidate. Building on that finding, the 2 researchers developed a theory that the text employed something referred to as alphagrams, meaning each word might represent a scrambled version of a genuine word with its letters rearranged out of sequence, functioning in the same way an anagram does. That single pivot from Arabic to Hebrew was already an unexpected development for a piece of software to produce. But when the team actually applied the Hebrew hypothesis to real sentences within the manuscript, something even more unusual emerged on the other side. The sentence that circulated through news outlets around the world came from using their alphagram method alongside Google Translate. Condra and Hauer extracted one legible sentence from the manuscript's opening pages. Once unscrambled and translated, it read roughly as follows. She made recommendations to the priest, man of the house, and me, and people. Condra told journalists the sentence was grammatically coherent and open to interpretation, describing it as a genuine breakthrough. After so many decades of complete silence from the text, media organizations picked the story up immediately. Fox News published a headline declaring the manuscript finally decoded. The Canadian press gave it coverage. Global News brought Condra in for a direct interview about the findings. For several days, it genuinely appeared that one of history's most persistent mysteries had been cracked open by a university AI lab. That wave of excitement did not hold for long once other specialists took a careful look at exactly how that sentence had actually been constructed. What followed turned into one of the most visible scientific pile-ons the Voynich community had witnessed in years. The pushback arrived within days. Medieval scholars and Voynich researchers responded almost immediately. Damian Fleming, a medievalist at Indiana University, Purdue University, Fort Wayne, took to social media to publicly ridicule the findings just days after the story broke. His core objection was not directed at the language identification portion of the study, which relied on solid statistical methods. What bothered him was the final translation step, where the research team turned to Google Translate, a tool designed for modern Hebrew, to interpret words that could be more than 600 years old and thoroughly scrambled on top of everything else. Critics noted that no specialist in ancient Hebrew had been consulted to verify the actual meanings. This was something Condra himself acknowledged would be necessary before the manuscript's full content could ever be confirmed. Voynich researchers were also quick to point out that over the decades, dozens of people had announced similar breakthroughs only to be quietly forgotten once no one could replicate what they had found. Before we continue, if you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please think about subscribing. It really does help the channel a great deal. That cycle of a bold announcement followed swiftly by public correction was nothing new to this field. It happened again just a year later, this time carrying even greater institutional weight behind it, the time a university retracted its very own press release. In May of 2019, the University of Bristol issued a press release declaring that one of its researchers, Dr. Gerard Cheshire, had decoded the manuscript in just 2 weeks. Cheshire claimed the text had been written in an extinct language he referred to as proto-Romance, an early form of spoken Latin that predated modern languages such as Italian and Spanish. His paper, published in the journal Romance Studies, argued the book dealt with women's health, herbal remedies, and therapeutic bathing practices. News outlets ranging from CNN to the BBC picked up the story within hours. Then the backlash arrived even faster than it had for the artificial intelligence study the previous year. Lisa Fagan Davis, executive director of the Medieval Academy of America, dismissed the entire concept of a proto-Romance language as nonsense, stating that she had attempted to reproduce Cheshire's results years before and found that the method completely broke down the moment you tried applying it in any consistent way. She argued the substitutions were purely subjective, meaning the letters could be bent into virtually any words depending on what outcome you were already hoping for. Bristol removed the article from its own website within a single day, noting that concerns had been raised regarding the validity of the research. 2 major claims across 2 separate years, both announced with considerable fanfare and both swiftly rejected by outside experts. A third theory also exists, one that suggests the entire manuscript may not require translation at all because there might simply be nothing genuine there to translate. The theory proposing the whole book is a fabrication. In 2004, a researcher named Gordon Rugg put forward something entirely different from any language-based claim. He suggested the text could have been generated using a device known as a cardangril, a tool with holes cut into a piece of cardboard that gets moved across a table filled with word fragments. By sliding the grill over columns arranged with prefixes, stems, and suffixes, you could produce word after word that resembles a real language statistically without any of it carrying genuine meaning. Rugg highlighted the manuscript's unusual word-length patterns, which behave in a strangely consistent, uniform manner that natural human languages almost never produce, as evidence pointing toward a mechanical process of exactly this kind. There is, however, a serious problem with the timeline. The Cardan grill was created by Girolamo Cardino in 1550. Radiocarbon dating of the manuscript's vellum places it somewhere between 1404 and 1438, well over a century before that particular tool ever came into existence. Rugg worked around this timeline gap by proposing either that an earlier version of the grill once existed and was simply lost to history, or that the manuscript itself was written later than the vellum, using old parchment stock that had been stored away for many years. That gap in the timeline has never been satisfactorily resolved by anyone on either side of the hoax debate. It also leads into a deeper puzzle hidden within the actual letters and words of the text, one that neither the artificial intelligence study nor the hoax argument can cleanly explain away. The words behave like they belong to a real language, yet they clearly do not. Researchers examining the manuscript's raw text discovered something unusual through a mathematical concept known as information entropy, which measures how predictable any given piece of writing actually is. Random nonsense tends to score extremely high on this scale, since nothing in it follows any repeating pattern. Real human languages score considerably lower, because certain letters and word structures appear again and again. The Voynich script lands low on that same scale too, placing it much closer to genuine language behavior than to meaningless noise. The words also follow rigid internal rules, governing which characters can appear at the beginning, middle, or end of any given word, much like the grammatical rules found in actual languages. This is precisely the kind of pattern that gives certain researchers the confidence that real meaning lies buried somewhere inside it. Yet strangely, it is also the very same kind of pattern that Rugg's Cardan grill method can produce accidentally through a purely mechanical process. Both camps in this argument can point at the exact same statistical evidence and arrive at completely opposite conclusions. That contradiction resurfaces once you step away from the letters entirely and consider where this book actually originated before it ever landed on a library shelf. The chain of ownership is every bit as tangled as the writing itself. A trail of owners that nobody can fully verify. The earliest documented owner by name is Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, who reigned from 1576 to 1612 and reportedly purchased the manuscript for 600 gold ducats, convinced it had been authored by the medieval English philosopher Roger Bacon. That claim originates from a letter written many years afterward by Johannes Marcus Marci, a physician based in Prague, addressed to the Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher in Rome. No entry in the actual imperial account books confirms that Rudolf ever made that transaction, which has led certain historians to treat the 600 ducat story as a legend rather than established fact. From Rudolf, the book is believed to have passed to his court pharmacist and eventually found its way to an alchemist by the name of Georg Barisch, who was equally unable to read it and pleaded with Kircher for help with translation in 1639. After Barisch's death, Marci inherited the manuscript and sent it to Kircher in 1665, along with his now well-known letter. The book then disappeared from any public record for approximately 2 centuries, resurfacing in 1912 when a Polish book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich discovered it sitting inside a chest at the Villa Mondragoni, a Jesuit college located near Rome, and purchased it immediately. Even Voynich's own account of finding the manuscript contains minor inconsistencies when compared against a later version written by his wife. That single detail is part of the reason one additional theory simply refuses to disappear entirely: the possibility that the whole manuscript might be a hoax carried out far more recently than anyone tends to assume, and that Voynich himself may have fabricated it. A handful of researchers have put forward the notion that Wilfrid Voynich himself produced the manuscript sometime between 1900 and 1912, using genuinely aged vellum scraps to simulate an ancient appearance, then invented both the script and the illustrations from nothing in order to raise the value of a supposedly mysterious find on the antiquarian market. Voynich had a rather eventful history that included forged passports and involvement in revolutionary activities earlier in his life, which those who favor this theory point to as evidence he was more than capable of pulling off this kind of deception. They also highlight the manuscript's handwriting, which appears strikingly consistent from beginning to end. This stands in contrast to most medieval books, which were typically copied by multiple scribes working alongside one another in a shared workshop. The radiocarbon dating carried out in 2009 represents the single greatest obstacle for this theory, since it establishes that the vellum itself genuinely dates back to the early 1400s, meaning it is centuries older than Voynich himself. That one scientific result does not completely eliminate every variation of the forgery argument, given that aged vellum could in theory be repurposed by a later forger. But it does mean the most common and widely repeated version of the hoax theory has a very stubborn piece of physical evidence standing firmly in its path. So what does all of this actually amount to? After the artificial intelligence language study, the Bristol proto-romance claim, the Cardan-Grill hoax theory, the entropy analyses, and more than a century of ownership records riddled with gaps, not a single person has produced a translation that other independent experts can reliably confirm. The work carried out by Condra and Hauer offered researchers a genuinely valuable clue, a concrete statistical pointer in the direction of Hebrew as a plausible root language, published in a legitimate peer-reviewed journal known as Transactions of the Association for Computational Linguistics. However, the single sentence that captured all the headlines relied on a contemporary translation tool never designed to handle a 600-year-old, potentially scrambled piece of writing, and Condra himself acknowledged that full confirmation would still require a specialist in ancient Hebrew prepared to tackle the remainder of the puzzle. The Bristol claim fell apart within days under the same kind of careful examination. The hoax theory hits its own immovable barrier in the form of the radiocarbon dating results. What the available evidence genuinely supports is neither a mystery fully solved nor a hoax conclusively proven. It supports the existence of a manuscript that keeps generating patterns real enough to draw in serious researchers and complicated enough to shatter every single claim of a breakthrough so far. If this kind of thorough exploration is something you are interested in seeing more of, subscribing is completely free and helps keep this channel chasing down stories exactly like this one.